Hi. If you don't already know me, my name is Sam Barker. I am a sound designer, re-recording mixer, and recording artist based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Lately I've been doing re-sound designs for anime scenes mixed in Dolby Atmos on Instagram and TikTok. This channel is going to be me breaking down those sound design projects, more about audio technology, a lot of plugin reviews, and basically if it's about audio technology or audio theory, that's what I love. So I'm gonna go over that. Sweet. The project I want to break down today, I just posted on Instagram, and it's about 1:30 long. It's a scene from Evangelion, Neon Genisis Evangelion, the original show, not the movies. Let's go ahead and get right into it. So this is going to be a binaural audio mix in Dolby Atmos, and basically that it uses psychoacoustics to give the impression of surround on headphones. So you will want some headphones to really hear this correctly, and this can be re-rendered to a surround format, but this seems to work well for social media because it plays in a stereo space like YouTube and all the other Insta and TikTok do as well. So let's just play it through once. I'll leave the renderer open here. The little green spheres you're going to see moving around are basically called objects. They're tracks that I have assigned to objects and then automated that object to move around, and it sounds like that sound is coming from those objects. So let's just play it through once and then we'll break it down. あれがエヴァの本当の姿。 So there you go. That is the project in a nutshell. It was a bit of a doozy. The automation definitely took a lot more than I thought it was going to on this. So before anything else, I want to quickly talk about kind of how Dolby Atmos works and how I'm using it here. In Dolby Atmos mixing, you have a bunch of different options on how you want to mix things. They come down to, one, you can use what are called objects, which you can assign a track to an object, and if you want, you can assign multiple tracks to that same object. And that's what the little green spheres are. And it's going to sound like those sounds are coming from that space. Another way to think about it is you have a theater, and this is where they move around in a theater. I think for binaural audio, it makes more sense to have, the person's head here to show this is kind of where the sounds are coming from around you. Your other option is to mix to what's called a bed. And for big film projects, a bed is generally going to fit. I think Pro Tools supports up to 712. So 7 surround, 2 overheads, and 1 LFE. And a big film project is going to have anywhere from 5 to 20 beds for different things like dialogue. Sound effects, is going to have a whole bunch, like one for ambience, one for soft Foley, hard Foley, that sort of thing. And then you're going to have 1 or 2 for music, of course, as well. And beds and objects usually are going to sound very similar. They do the same thing. From my understanding, and I'm by no means a Dolby expert, I'm still learning, but a bed is going to be pretty much identical to using objects. until you get above a 712 setup. Say you want 714 with 4 overheads instead of 2, or even 916. You're going to get better imaging from an object because it's not limited to Pro Tools maximum, which is 712. And I'm talking about the internal Dolby Atmos renderer here. There is an external one that you can round trip to. I'm not doing that at the moment because it costs $300, but maybe in the future. But basically, you're going to get better imaging of your sounds for upmixing, because you can just have a re-render for 916 and the objects will move around. And finally, you can also have what's called an object bed, where basically I'm placing one of those green spheres around the room, exactly where your speaker would be. So left, center, right, and then we can take a look at right stereo rear, right top, front. You get the idea. The advantage here being then you can bus to that object bed, and any of these static here, if I solo this real quick and bring back up the renderer. Yeah. So what that allows me to do is bus to my object bed. So for instance, here I'm sending, in addition to the object, which is a stereo object, I'm sending to a left top rear and right top rear, and you'll see it here. Static right there in my object bed, which just gives me a little bit more depth. And if I look at it real quick, you'll see I'm quickly automating volume up to that. So it's like the shockwave coming to behind us. At least that's what I'm trying to do. So yeah, that is Dolby Atmos in a nutshell. And you can monitor in a whole bunch of different ways. You know, if you have a 5.1 setup, you can monitor in 5.1. But the beauty being, you can then do re-renders to whatever format you want. You know, let's say you want a film release for 5.1, but then you also want a binaural. You can just do a binaural re-render. So yeah, enough about Dolby Atmos. Let's get into the sounds. So this is it. Again, 1:30 long. And I feel like I got some pretty good depth out of this one. So really it's broken down into like maybe 5 different categories here of sound. So let's just start off by going through those. The bulk of the sound design, of course, is going to be these mech sounds. And it was a fun challenge trying to find mechanical sounds that felt like they had enough scale for this huge mech suit like the Ava is. So let's solo some of that real quick so you can hear. There you go, and again. And this is just the sound of the mech's arms moving and that sort of thing. I also have metal impacts right here. And a little bit of metal texture that I felt was necessary. But like, here's the punches. And you'll hear that part of the hardest thing about this sound design and mix was all of these metal reverberations. They're not going to stay in one place. They're going to follow the suit. So let me show you some of the automation real quick. Basically, there are 2 ways to automate. You can perform it by using one of your automation modes, latch, touch, and if I had joysticks, that might be a little easier, but I don't have a big console, so I would have to go in basically and perform each knob, which would be probably more time consuming than the other way to automate, which is so-called keyframe automation. Basically, you're going frame by frame, and you're starting in one place, and then doing glide to all enable, or adding a breakpoint to all enabled. For instance, I believe only my pan is enabled. If I wanted to move these, I could do this, that, maybe give it some size, and then glide it to all enabled, which is Option Shift Dash. And now it moves. And you basically go frame by frame. But I wanted, these metal sounds to track with the suit. So you'll see, and of course this is sending to an object, And these are stereo objects, so they're using 2 channels. And you can hear, if I just solo that one, it's tracking with that hand, and that took a long time, just trying to get it right. So yeah, those are my metal impacts. And pretty much every track is automated like that, with a couple static exceptions. The next biggest part is kind of bread and butter sound design, whooshes. But especially for this project, you know, the mech suit's so big that it's going to move a ton of air. So I felt like I needed the whooshes to be big as well. And it took some doing. And again, I'm automating all these to try and track a little bit with the movement. And by themselves, I felt like that one needed to be a huge whoosh. And by themselves, you know, they don't sound that crazy, but in context, they help the believability of this giant suit moving through the air. Next, as far as the mech sounds go, are going to be the Mech Footsteps, which I had, like 7 individual tracks for. We can go to these first. And I loved these. I think I found on SoundSnap. Just great. And then for near the end of the video, when the mech is walking through the, nuked city, I found these low kind of thumps, but then I also layered these rock crunches over top, and I'm sending these through a verb to get them a little further away sounding, and then also just a little bit of a bell curve at 4500, because as things get further away, you're going to have a steep decline in the higher frequencies, so that kind of sells it a little more. As far as the footsteps go, you'll also see all of these buses here. The first one I'm just sending to the LFE, and the LFE is really the one thing that I'm sending to a bed, and before it goes back to the bed, I have a little bit, Dolby in their documentation says to do this for your LFE, or it gets super muddy around like 300, and really all you need for the LFE is about 120 hertz. I think I have 121, but a low pass there, just to keep it focused and tight. And so yeah, I'm sending to the LFE, and then I'm sending to left stereo rear, right stereo rear. If we open this back up, once I get underground, I wanted a little more impact. See, left stereo rear, right stereo rear. And then besides those, I am sending to a couple of reverbs and some parallel compression. Part of what I love about Dolby mixing is I'm sending the reverb to the left and right, and then moving it along with the suit, so it sounds like it's reflecting off the buildings. And I think I have a little bit of pre-delay on there. Yeah. So without, sounds tiny. With, it's got some weight to it, and it feels like it's in the space. And then the second reverb I use for this, it's actually like a music mixing technique that I feel really works for big sounds like this. It's basically an ambience bed of sorts, where you'll hear it goes on for a long time, like 8 seconds, over 8 seconds, with some pre-delay also. And it's adding this like rumble bed underneath it. If I take it out, still sounds big, but it doesn't sound like a mech suit really hitting the ground. That's going to have some tail to it. So yeah. And then finally, parallel compression. And I think I also am automating this, yeah. So it's like it's coming from reflections on the buildings. My parallel compression here, I'm using 1176 model. This is the Waves one. And I'm letting some of the transient through with a little slower attack, but then a pretty quick release also. So it's just grabbing a little bit more out of the tail end of this and then rolling off. And you're getting some saturation that comes with the bluey model of the 1176. So without the parallel comp, and of course ratio at 20. That's without. That's with. So like it's subtle, but it does help add a little more weight to the footsteps. That's most of the mech sounds on the whole. And then probably the next biggest thing are explosions and kind of energy fields breaking, that sort of thing, which is going to be all of this. And again, these are automated to move outwards. I wanted this explosion to be a little more understated because we're trying to build to this big explosion down here. So I got this explosion that has a perspective from far away. Yeah, is believable that it's still big but far away. And then I think I layered another distant explosion on there with a little more mid-range, and together. Yeah. And then finally the last explosion here. The big one, I still went a little understated with this, just picking and choosing sounds. A little bit of a riser. And again, like I showed you, I'm sending to the left top rear and right top rear real quick to kind of emulate that shockwave hitting. And this is my favorite sound effect in the world right here. It's this, I found it in a couple different libraries. It's from a dynamite explosion in Chile, and it just has this like mid-range sparkle that really works for like distant explosions. And here I'm just automating a little bit. Again, it's supposed to be distant, so I'm taking more high end off and then rolling it off as we get back to this perspective. The last big elements are going to be rubble and like earth impacts and that sort of thing. And these were a bit of a challenge to automate. The perspective changes a whole lot, so trying to get that to be a little more smooth and less jarring was took a little bit. But rock slides, and I think down here I have an artillery kind of layered and automated to move with perspective, of course. And it doesn't really make sense until you hear it in context, and then it's... And for these, really, I'm just sending to the LFV, which I feel like helps a bit, but if you do a lot of bussing, you can get pretty busy in the mix when it comes to these big sounds. So I err on the side of simplicity for that sort of thing. The last big element, I'd say, or last two really, is going to be Gore sounds, which again, I tried to stay a little more subdued than maybe I usually would. It's just, you know, a lot of layers, so I don't want it to get too busy to where you can't pick things out. And those, again, are automated and to try and fit the scene. Yeah, so just a little gore, you know, not over the top, but enough to be believable. Finally, we kind of have this last little ambience bed, if you will, the aftermath of the explosion. I wanted this to be subtle, but really kind of pervasive. So we've got some LFE earthquake tremors, which I'm sending to the object bed. And then a natural disaster earthquake rumble, 2 different atomic blasts in mono, which I'm just sending to a summing bus up there, which sends to a stereo bus, and then to the object bed left and right. So if you hear real quick, subtle in the background, but one of the bombs is supposed to be like underwater perspective and one is not, and I use the underwater perspective as like underneath the ground. And then yeah, just some wind and like metal textures, which I felt added a little bit to the ambience. And you can still hear the footsteps because they're solo saved. Yeah. And there's some wind. So all that together just adds up. To this ambience and mood. And that's really the whole project. I mean, there's some little things here and there. Pretty sure I have a couple impacts, which I'm sending to an LFE, and then I have some glass impact somewhere in here. Yeah, these little glass cracks. Out of context, they don't sound great, to be honest, but in context, they add. Yeah. And then I'm keeping the original voice audio by separating it with an AI model, Ultimate Vocal Remover. I think it's called, open source. It's awesome. Just sending it to the object bus center channel. It isolates it pretty well from the rest of the soundscape. Altogether, that's the project. And then, you know, volume automation, mixing, that sort of thing, along with, of course, everything we've talked about Atmos mixing so far. And again, I'm not an expert in Atmos. I'm still kind of exploring the medium, but I love it. It gives me so much control, whereas sometimes in stereo I feel a little locked down. Don't get me wrong, you can make some great sound design and great sounding sound design in stereo. You just have to be a little more selective with sounds and depth of sounds because it can get busy quick. So yeah, that's the whole project. Thanks for joining me, breaking it down. Hopefully I'm gonna do a lot more of these, and like I said before, also other things audio technology, and I do a bit of music mixing as well, so maybe we'll get into that too. Let me know if there's anything you want me to touch on, but I think in the coming weeks, probably just more of these breakdowns, sound designs I've already done, and then a couple plugin reviews, that sort of thing. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out to me via email, which I have linked to my YouTube info page, and with any questions or freelance inquiries. See you next time.